Today's video is the first in a series of videos on picking up stitches, picking up and knitting stitches, and knitting up stitches. Now these three terms are often used interchangeably, but they also have different separate meanings. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. So there are two basic scenarios for how a new piece of fabric can be joined to an existing piece of fabric without grafting or seaming. So let's look at the two scenarios and then talk about why the terms pick up stitches, pick up and knit stitches, and knit up stitches might be ambiguous or confused in these two scenarios. So the first of these scenarios involves creating new live stitches on the needle by pulling loops of the working yarn through the existing piece of fabric. There are a lot of variations in what that might look like and how it might be done, depending on where the new stitches are needed. For example, loops might be pulled through an existing stitch close to the edge of the fabric. So this is a cast on or bind off edge, but it could be done near a cast on edge. So we've pulled a new loop through an existing stitch, but it could be done somewhere in the middle of the fabric away from an edge. When stitches are created, live stitches are created along a vertical edge, there are a couple of different ways that this might be done depending on the fabric and the selvage stitches. For example, in this case, I can knit through the edge of the fabric, not through the center of a stitch, but between the selvage stitch and the next stitch in. So I'm simply knitting through the fabric and pulling a new loop, a new stitch on the needle that way. In other cases, I might be working with something like garter stitch. And with garter stitch, the edges might be slipped, or you might have the little bumps at the end of the ridge. So one way of handling that might be to actually thread all of those bumps that are at the end of the ridges and thread them all onto a needle first, and then go across and knit all of them off in one go. In a previous video, I showed how I threaded slipped selvage stitches from a heel flap onto a needle before knitting them all off. The second scenario is when you're attaching a new piece of fabric, such as a border that is going to be surrounding the entire original piece of fabric, and then attaching it to the original piece of fabric as it's worked. So in this case, I have a little border fabric, and I'm working it back and forth. On wrong side rows, I'm working away from the original fabric, and on right side rows, I'm working toward the original fabric. When I get to the last stitch, I work it together with one of these stitches that have been, one of these selvage stitches that have been threaded on the existing needle. So I get one each time I go. So those are the two scenarios, creating new stitches and lifting existing stitches. So do you have a feeling about how the three terms picking up stitches, picking up and knitting stitches, or knitting up stitches might apply to the different scenarios and the different situations within each scenario? What if I said this to you? Please go pick up a bag of dog food at the store. Now, what if I said to you, please pick up the bag of dog food off the floor? You see how pick up is used in two very different ways. In one sentence, I'm using pick up to mean acquire. Please go get a bag of dog food. And in the other sentence, I'm asking you to lift up the existing bag of dog food that we already have. So can you see how the term pick up stitches can be ambiguous and yet also apply to both of those two scenarios? So it's no wonder that the term pick up stitches is often used to describe lifting existing stitches onto a needle, as well as go get yourself some brand new stitches through the existing fabric. But it's also clear why the term pick up and knit stitches is very meaningful in a specific set of circumstances when you are acquiring new stitches in a two-step process. But you're not always using a two-step process when you're acquiring new stitches. Knitting up stitches makes a lot of sense when describing the one-step process of acquiring stitches. So you may be wondering if I have an opinion about which term is the proper one to use in which situation, and I really don't. What I think is more important is for knitting patterns to be very specific about how they are using a particular term and to define their terms in the pattern, because there is ambiguity, not in just this situation, but all throughout knitting. For example, what do I mean if I tell you to do a make one? What do I mean if I tell you to knit something in moss stitch? These terms are ambiguous and have 2 and 3 different meanings, and they ought to be defined in the pattern. But as a knitter, if you are using a pattern that is ambiguous and doesn't define clearly what it is you're supposed to use, look at the context of the entire pattern. What is the pattern asking you to do next? Is there a border that's being joined? Look at the photo on the pattern page and see if you can get any clues from that about what the terms that are being used that are unclear might actually mean. And if all else fails, you can always ask on Ravelry. In the coming weeks, I'll be demonstrating all the various ways of acquiring new stitches on the needle, whether it's on a horizontal edge, a vertical edge, in the center of the fabric, whether stitches need to be lifted onto a needle first or not. And I hope you'll join me for that. If you have any questions or comments about the video today or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or you can join me over in my Ravelry group, Rocks. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I'd really appreciate it if you did. You can hover over my face right here, and when the subscription button pops up, you can click on it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.